good comment in our weekly agenda for our release management group around our dog fooding initiative. And you have some super good points. One, just about how much of a project this is, how large, how cascadingly impactful this initiative is. And then the second one was around the mechanics of working with other groups to source and replace the release post. And then finally, on a more technical side, adding tests before we commit to moving forward with this approach. So I think we can tackle those in any order. I'll pass them to you and I can take some notes, and we'd love just to have an open discussion about what this should look like.
Awesome. Yeah, that's actually a great summary. Those are kind of the three main questions I have. So yeah, maybe we'll start with the kind of what the process will look like, or what the proposed process is going forward. The question I had, the main question is that right now we have a very, from what I can tell, it's a very automated process. Like we have, we make these release posts and then those are used to generate the blog posts. And so is the idea to kind of step backwards and make that more of a manual process, that marketing's just going to craft those each month on their own? Or is there still going to be driven by data from the release posts data?
That's a really great question. I would say holistically, end to end, the release post process today is very manual and has several different groups reviewing the content between the issue creation, the merge request creation, the release post merge request creation. So there's 3 different assets for a single feature that ends up needing to be curated, reviewed, approved by marketing, and then it gets merged into the branch for the release post page that's in our handbook. And at that point, marketing has their asset created. What we're noticing is that all of that upstream process of creating issues and creating the release post MR is duplicative effort for the product manager, but also for all the content reviewers. Like tech writers have to review the documentation MR as well as the release post MR and make sure that all of that makes sense and the copy is right before marketing gets their end of state asset. Mm-hmm. So what we're attempting to do is to create this in-product release notes experience that is automated from the product management and engineering side. So once an MR on the engineering side gets merged into the product, the issue gets closed, the release notes header gets pulled onto the releases page. And then once we declare that tag for the self-managed release, it's already there. And then marketing can cherry pick what things they want to present as a part of the blog post that they have today. So it's not really, the part of marketing is that intro paragraph where they highlight 6 or 7 issues from the entire release, which could be over 100 issues. That's already manual, so that process won't really change. They're just going to be sourcing the content and then pointing people to the in-product release notes for the endless scroll that we currently have in the release post today. So that's the ideal end state. And if we can create the canonical source of an issue to populate all this information, then we knock out a bunch of birds with the same stone. So that's the concept of having the issue be the source of truth for the release notes content and where we pool all the review together from marketing and product.
Nice. Okay. That makes sense. I'm totally on board. That sounds awesome. I guess maybe my specific question is, will the end state, will this marketing page have any automated content at all, or will it be purely just written by a marketing person?
Well, may I jump in, Jackie?
Sure.
I mean, for the endless scroll part, I mean, that part where it's just all the details, that surely we could automate that in some way. But then I guess the marketing people would want to highlight certain specific things. That would always be manual, I guess. But if we could at least get all the information dumped into a single file, you know, When we added the releases section, a release notes section to the issue, that was relatively recently, right?
And it was in
And
an effort to support this end state to help
right.
create the pattern of product managers adding release notes content to their issues, and as an iteration toward this eventual state.
So currently we're not currently we have that space, but we're not actually picking that up at this point.
If you use
Right.
the release post generator, which is a new tool that James Ramsey built, you can leverage the release notes header to create your release post MRs for you as a product manager.
Okay,
So that's a
awesome.
tool that's been created to cut out that process of the product manager creating another MR related to the feature work.
Okay.
So I'm presenting the 13.4 release post, and what marketing ends up doing is curating this portion, this written content here. This is all manual today. They don't have any automated populated issues. This is a long series of Slack messages, comments in an MR, and it's a manual chain. There's nothing automated about it. The only part that's automated are the key features released in GitLab. And what we can envision this changing into is that this is now a link to the in-product releases page that says, check out our in-product releases page for the key features released in 13.4. And if we were to scroll down to the bottom of the page, you would, if you open it up in the web IDE and were to see like what's the source of this page, you will notice that this is just a markdown file with formatting and a header. It's a blog post. So they could, marketing could do that independently of the product delivery process, and they can do it at any time. So say that they wanted to do now GitLab.com monthly blog posts or weekly blog posts, or they wanted to do a self-managed blog post, like that can be an independent action of product management, which is what we're trying to attain.
Jackie, when you said
Nice.
the bottom part is generated, how does that work?
So today there's a release post manager that goes in and creates a batch job and a bunch of tasks to take all these individual merge requests and merge them into a branch for this page, this release post page.
Okay.
And then that release post page goes live on the 22nd, gets merged into a production state. And
so every MR will be on that page.
Right.
Wow, that's awesome.
So you know how I ping you sometimes on my release post MRs?
Yeah.
There's like 200 of those every release for each product manager.
Wow.
And I would say personally, as a product manager, I do like a batch creation at the beginning of the quarter for all my direction items. That takes about 3 hours to do. And then I spend about a week to every month just refining the content, making sure that these features make it in, bugging Nicole if the features have made it in. Like the process of me and Nicole, the 2 weeks before the release, like, Nicole, is it in yet? How does this look? And if we had this automated where it looks at closed issues, that process goes away. You know, I don't have to bug anybody.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. The reason I'm asking this, maybe I should have started with this, is that the whole process on a technical side, it builds up these release post objects, and it does that by looking at all the YAML files, and then it uses that to generate the markdown, and it also uses that to generate the releases page. They currently share it. So as I'm thinking through this, I'm thinking we can change that process to change our releases page, but at the moment we would also affect the blog post because they both source their data from the same thing. But if we're completely changing the blog post, so we no longer rely on this generating these release post objects, then we kind of have the freedom to define the process almost from scratch. So I'm mostly just wondering about the dependencies between how we go about doing this. Yeah.
So,
and I think you kind of answered that.
For me, the in product releases page can have its own source of release notes, and it doesn't have to be in congruity with the existing release post process. So the idea is that we're encouraging product managers to groom their issues so that the release post generator will pull in the right MRs. And if that process is working as expected and we have a separate mechanism for pulling in release notes from issues, those should eventually match because it should be populated. In my head, the release notes page should be populated from these issue labels and a closed status.
Yes. So essentially, we would just go for whatever the release is. It's being closed, and then just grab the notes and put them somewhere, right?
Yeah. And this is where we may want to deliver like releases without a tag pretty soon so that we can create a holding place for these pre-releases. Like for 13.5, we have several items that are already merged in, and we may want to populate that, hydrate that release pre-tag so people can see what's currently on .com now. But you have it right that either we run this as a pipeline at the same time as a tag being generated, or we run this before and it's just like a regular pipeline that's scheduled to run every day at the end of the day to populate release post items that have been closed.
So I guess we'll have to be careful to not pick up any issues that have just been closed, right? And have not been closed because they've been completed. They've been closed for some other reason. Because we do that sometimes, or would we maybe just take off the release or something like that to, the release label or something.
There's two approaches that I'm thinking about. So I have in 13.6 assign a release tag to an issue, so that there's a process where the EM would own if it's been added to, or we can create automation around this, but initially it might be a manual task where if it's been merged in and the work flows in production, then it can get assigned the pre-release or release tag, which would probably be like on the 22nd, the 22nd at 12 before the release gets cut or before it's made public, because the tag gets created on the 22nd. And that could be a job that we assign that particular issue to a tag if it's in workflow production and it's in a closed state. I also think that there's a world where we use the release post item label and it's in a closed state, and it doesn't have to be assigned to a release tag, but it can be assigned to the milestone or the group milestone. I see a lot of potential for this to be applicable to our end users, like allowing them to choose. I want to populate release notes from milestones and from issues and epics, and have them hydrate that release notes section with those qualifiers. And then being able to select the header that they want to populate that information, or only pull in title. I think there's a lot of flexibility that can be afforded here that our users would like.
I mean, if we're talking about that level of configuration, I guess we could potentially even have a configuration section that would feed either a step in, a job in their pipeline, or a special pipeline, whatever. Yeah. And it would just be the same job. But yeah, we've got the tools in place to do it.
So
I think
all of that.
Sorry, Nathan.
So all of that all sounds really great to me. But so all of that would be implemented in our main GitLab repo, correct? Like we could now it's kind of weird because the pipeline that actually generates the releases page is in the marketing repo. So it sounds like we're okay with moving all that to the main GitLab repo.
Where the issues live.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, you could do it either way, right? Because you could either move it and then have it triggered by, when there's each time pipelines run, basically, you can do a check. Or if you left it where it was, it could just, we'd have to find some way to tell it where to look, but it could it could be scheduled once a day or whatever, regardless of what's happening in that particular, or they could just kick off a pipeline. That would be another way of doing it. But
Right.
yeah, I guess do we want to? Well, I guess why not? I mean, it'd probably be a pretty fast job. Have it in, I was just thinking, would we want to keep it in main repo because we've already got so many other jobs, right? But if it'll be, it will be pretty fast actually. It would just be doing a few calls.
And the other thing, the nice thing about moving it to the main GitLab repo is we could start using that release key in GitLab YAML and generate it that way rather than doing it through the API. So that could be kind of another level of dogfooding that we could get out of this process.
I love it. And so would it then, does it go on a special branch or something like that? Where does it actually go, the output each time?
Like where is it? Like what triggers it, or?
No, I mean, each time we run the pipeline, we basically create some data, right? We create a YAML or whatever. And where does that actually get stored? Does that get stored on a branch, a releases branch or something, or which could be also named in the YAML, or
Would we have to actually store it somewhere, or could the process just go get all the issues, get all the descriptions, and then just pass it kind of in memory to the job, and then the release key and the GitLab YAML would be responsible for creating the new release?
So, but then we would always create a release, right?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, okay, I guess that's what the release node is for. Yep.
Right. It'd be a little different because the current process goes and actually it regenerates all the content and then updates all of them if they change. Yep. Whereas I'm imagining the new one would only just basically create a new one every time. So it'd only be run once a month.
I guess the part that I'm not quite getting is there will always be a manual component to this, right? So we'll produce as much as we can automatically, but then the marketing team will have to step in at some point and do something. So how do they?
So they shouldn't have to do anything. Like their blog post content is going to be in a separate project on our marketing blog. This releases page will be hydrated whenever changes are made with the issues. And this is more like if we only look at how the release tag works today, the idea is that once that tag is created by our distribution team, or we have that stable branch created, we then create that release object with the relevant release notes. Marketing is completely outside of this. They can take that information and then build their blog post around that.
Okay, well, so in that case, I guess the only thing we just need to kind of really crystallize is how do we pick up the issues, like how are they marked, and how do we not pick up an issue that's been closed for some other reason that's not actually part of the release? I guess that's tags, right? Or labels. Yeah.
So the idea is that there's 3 main labels that we currently use in the release post generator. And by 3, I mean, there's categories, like it has the stage, the category, and release post item. And then you also have tier that the feature is available in. And we should also add a label for .com and SaaS so that people know, or .com SaaS or self-managed, so that people can parse if that's a .com only or a self-managed only feature.
So if an issue is closed, the engineering manager will be responsible for removing those labels.
Well, the idea is that once that feature has been pulled into a milestone, it has the correct labels on it. So you'll notice that there's some items currently in 13.5 that I use the release post generator for. And it has like release post item primary. It has the DevOps release. It has the release management, release orchestration, and the premium or ultimate label or core. So it already has those labels as a part of the product management process.
No,
Sean,
no,
do you mean
sorry, I
like
meant-
if it closed, if it's that we decide not to ship this feature, like if we
exactly.
close it in favor of something else?
Yes,
There
which is the exception, but it does happen, right?
Yeah, there will need to be manual intervention to reopen an
Okay.
issue if it was closed accidentally.
Oh no, I even meant like say some halfway through the release we decide we're not going to ship this issue for some reason.
Well, then it moves out of
Edit-
the milestone, and when the job
Okay.
runs on the 22nd, it won't be pulled into
It's
the
gone.
release.
Okay. So so we would just take the milestone off, and that's the end
Yeah,
of it.
I think we would. Yeah, we would. The job should key off of the milestone,
Okay.
because we don't offer draft releases yet. But
Yeah.
once we offer draft releases, there will be a world where that release will be alive all the time, and any issue that's currently scheduled for that milestone and its corresponding release notes could be populated onto that page, for example.
Yeah.
And just adding to that as well, kind of underlining that I think it will have to be a combination of factors like milestone labels. But in addition, we may have to look at whether what workflow label, not necessarily use closed as the only indicator, because in the handbook, many teams consider an item complete when it's either in workflow verification or it's closed, those two things. So
Okay.
we'd have to make sure we consider that as well.
And I
Cool.
also think there's a world where we could potentially look to see if there's a merge request that's deployed on production associated with that release or with that issue. Like there's a world
Oh,
where
yeah, exactly. I was going to say that, we could always look through the issue and see, are the associated MRs, are they merged? I mean, I think that would be fine.
yeah.
At least one,
It's the idea here though is like we get it really close to being complete and then there's like a reconciliation done pre 22nd or on the 22nd prior to announcement that it has all the right issues in it.
Oh yeah, and if it's missing some, you would just go through and correct the labels and then rerun the pipeline.
Right.
Yeah, and
Awesome.
and even more manual at the end of the day, if it gets generated wrong, you just click edit and you edit it manually.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. So there's a lot of safeguards here because it's just a big old markdown file ultimately. So
that's really cool. So I guess kind of related to that then, how soon do we think we would move to a process like that? Or maybe a better question is, do we predict there's going to be a lot of changes to the current releases page before we move to that process? Because it's just whether or not it's worth investing in testing.
Yeah. So couple of things. I think from Farnoosh's side, we need to have an adequate replacement for what's on .com right now, which is this draft release concept. So we may need to, in order for us to fully move over to the releases page and for us to be confident that the release post process isn't going to be what it is today, that's one of her requirements from a product ops side. The other piece is sorting and filtering, which I think we're adding because people will need to be able to self-shop the page. And we have this idea of the splash page so that there's a separation between like your current release view versus old releases and the dedicated release pages that is currently in design, and we can like think through what that looks like. But as an MVC in the leanest approach, if we can fairly quickly figure out how to populate the releases page from issues with correct labels, then that will be a great proof of concept for Farnoosh to even start thinking through how do we continue to move product managers more into the issue and not creating merge requests for the release blog post. And then we can start getting more feedback on what needs to be included in there.
I mean, a proof of concept could be done, I think, without any, correct me if I'm wrong, without any actual coding other than, creating a CI job that does some API calls, and I don't think we even need to touch the release node for the most basic type of. Obviously, we would update the release node eventually, but in order to assemble all the data, I think we already have everything that we need.
So
Right.
that would be cool for us to start populating the page with these issues, and then being able to like reconcile what's populated on this page versus what's in a release post, and to
Yep.
kind of figure out like how can we differentiate those, because a big pain point for our product managers today is that oftentimes a release post is one MR representative of a body of work. So it could be 15 issues, 2 epics that are compiled into this feature set that we're then announcing in the release blog post. So that will be one thing that we'll have to like culturally shift people to, as a part of this, like populating release notes from issues or epics too.
Just want to add also that it might be a good idea, going back to Nathan's point on the tests, to involve Daniel in some of these conversations as well. And I think partnering with him to kind of identify gaps and help prioritize kind of test coverage areas and where we might find the most benefit.
Can I just ask a question again about the draft or the future release, whatever we're going to. So in this scenario where we tag it, using these labels, and we use the milestone. So for example, we have it at 13.5, and so items that are in some type of future release. I'm just trying to reconcile how we would actually have any, right? Because does that mean that people are actually developing for something that's to be released in 13.6 now, or I'm missing something here?
So
how do we define it as being for a future release?
that's where like milestones come into play. If we're looking at current state, in the future, we may have like associating an issue with the release. And if we support that, then they can assign a release to an issue. And then that issue needs to be delivered in a future release. So
okay. So we wouldn't expect that the code would be merged, right? Because it's a future, but we could still pick up the issues and pick up whatever's in that release header section.
Exactly.
Okay.
So here's a really good example. You know how sometimes we have carryover issues from 13.4 to 13.5, and like
unfortunately,
and like the first week of 13.5, we close that issue and it's merged in production.
Right.
And then we end up iterating on it really fast, and we merge like 2 more changes for that same issue in 13.5. Well, those will all be closed and pulled onto the 13.5 pre-release page, because they're live on .com. It's just for self-managed. Self-managed isn't going to get them until we cut the release binary on the 22nd. So that's where that's in this case, this is a .com release. That's what that tag would represent, is all the stuff that's on .com currently, but it's not officially a binary or a release that can be downloaded by self-managed yet. So it would be tagless, but it would still have closed issues assigned to that milestone.
Interesting. So we don't currently do that, right? We don't differentiate between the two, right?
No. So that's where like we'll when to Nathan's point on like the sequencing thing, are the things that we need to complete first before we could change our process completely. Draft releases needs to be supported first. And then after that, we just need to make sure that we can include epics as well as issues, and that it actually works. Because the biggest thing is if issues if like for some reason it's not performant because it's running through hundreds of issues, pulling this header, and we lose data.
That's possible. Yeah.
Then it's not usable, right? We have to find a different way to like programmatically suck in all those issues. And of course, like I update issues every single day, and sometimes I move them between like the Tuesday milestones every day. So like those changes that are so frequent. And if we run this job every day, it might might be a wash, it might not. It might be so taxing on our releases page that it might not be useful.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, if we have it in the main pipelines, how many times the engineers run those pipelines, and it's only really interesting when they're finally merged, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would imagine we wouldn't run that job in every pipeline, like every MR pipeline. We probably only run it against master, and then only if certain files changed, or I don't know. Something. I think we could probably find a way to limit it.
Yeah, actually, we
that
could
makes
just look at master, I guess. Yep.
And there might be something to learn from the release post generator job that's been created, because James set up something to like run this every hour, and it will sleuth through all the MRs, all the issues, looking for these labels, and generate the MRs on behalf of those issues. So there might be something to learn from there. So Nathan, I don't really know if that answers your question on tests. I know that we're a little over time, but as far as, I think that we should be making changes in the next couple milestones of that page that could dramatically alter what's in there today. So I'm not convinced that tests
worth writing tests.
are great to do right now. Although maybe I still expect like your badges are going to be there. I still expect that we'll have the asset links and the source code. So maybe there's portions that we know that will still be there that it's relevant to have tests for, but the actual release notes content, maybe not.
Gotcha.
I don't know how the tests work. Sorry.
I answered in the issue, by the way, Nathan.
Oh yeah, perfect. I think I saw that right before. I'm actually kind of leaning towards writing some basic tests for it, because it sounds like there is quite a bit of development, like product development, that we want to get out before we start making these changes. And it'd be nice just to have, I don't think it would be too much work. Maybe Sean would probably know more.
No, I think actually it doesn't. I think if we just write some tests for the code that's there, that shouldn't take too much time. Because what also, prior to what you just said, Jackie, I would also probably rewrite the code, because it's just like, it doesn't meet GitLab standards, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But if we're going to do major work on it, then that doesn't make sense. So we could kind of just do some basic tests, and then as we make the changes, we could write tests for the new code. We could even do test-driven development.
Look at that. Oh my gosh, that just gave me flashbacks to like my engineering ops days. Oh my goodness. So as far as what we're trying to accomplish in Q4 from a dogfooding perspective is getting this page populated with the new process, which is populating this page from issues, and then working with Farnoosh to understand what other requirements we need. We already have some of those defined, like group milestones was one of them. Draft releases is another one.
So just to put a box around the scope, so the Q4 would be not including the draft releases.
Right.
It would just be the current release.
Just the current issues populating, and then we can start scoping out like what it means to create a release without a tag and that stuff. The age-old conversation that we seem to keep always having.
The thing is that effectively that is a draft release, right? It's a draft release of the current release.
Mm-hmm. That's true. Okay, perfect. Well, thank you all so much. I will let you all